All right, let's get right into it. We've all seen it in the movies, right? A suitcase overflowing with cash gets handed off, and somehow it magically becomes clean, legitimate money. But how does that actually work in the real world? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden and honestly fascinating process of money laundering. It all boils down to a pretty simple question. How does a criminal take a huge pile of illegal cash and turn it into money they can actually use to buy a house or a fancy car without setting off a million red flags? Well, believe it or not, the answer is often hiding in plain sight at a business you probably drive by every single day. Here's the thing people don't always realize. For a major criminal operation, pulling off the crime is only half the job. The other, much harder half, is dealing with the profits. A mountain of cash is actually a massive headache. You can't just stroll into a bank and deposit $1 million, and you definitely can't buy a mansion with it without attracting all sorts of unwanted attention. And that is the fundamental problem money laundering is designed to solve. So, what exactly is it? Well, Interpol puts it pretty clearly. It's all about concealing or disguising the origins of dirty money. In other words, it's an act of deception. It's about creating a completely fake backstory for that money, so it looks like it came from a totally legitimate source. Now, this isn't just some chaotic random process. Oh no, it's actually a pretty methodical three-step cycle: placement, layering, and integration. The best way to think of it is like a washing machine for cash. We're going to walk through this whole wash cycle one step at a time. All right, step one, placement. And you got to understand, for the criminals, this is probably the most nerve-wracking part of the whole operation. This is where their physical cash has to make its first move into the legitimate financial world. The whole goal here, it's pretty simple, really. It's just about getting that bulky physical cash, the stuff stuffed in duffel bags or hidden under the floorboards, and sneaking it into a bank or a business without anyone noticing. So, how do they do it? Well, there are a few classic tricks. First, you've got something called structuring, or smurfing, which is a great name, by the way. This is where they break up a huge amount of cash into lots of smaller deposits to stay under the reporting radar. Then, of course, there are those cash-heavy businesses, like our car wash. It's super easy to mix dirty money in with the real earnings. Who's going to prove you washed 50 cars and not 150? And finally, there's the old-school method, just straight-up smuggling cash across a border. Okay, so the money's in the system. What's next? Well, now we get to the really intricate part. Step 2 is called layering, and this is where the financial magic trick really happens. Think of it this way. If placement was just about getting in the front door, layering is about creating a confusing maze of hallways and secret passages. The entire point is to create this incredibly complex, tangled web of transactions so that any investigator trying to follow the money just gets hopelessly lost. And man, the toolkit they use here is pretty wild. They set up these things called shell companies, which are basically fake corporations that only exist on paper. They create fake invoices for products that were never sold or services that were never performed. And of course, they use a whole series of complex wire transfers to bounce the money between countless accounts, often in offshore banks where secrecy is paramount. Every single transaction adds another layer of confusion. And finally, after all that work, we get to the last step in our wash cycle: integration. This is it. This is the payoff. So, the money has been placed, it's been layered, and now it's so far removed from the original crime that it looks completely clean. It can now flow back into the mainstream economy, and to anyone looking, it seems totally legit. The cycle is complete. So, what do they do with all this shiny, clean money? Well, exactly what you'd think. They buy the flashy stuff: luxury real estate, rare art, super yachts. They might invest it in a legitimate business to blur the lines even further. Or, and this is the really scary part, they just pour it right back into funding even more crime. Okay, so we get the how, but now let's talk about how big, because this is not some small-time problem. We are talking about a global issue on a scale that is, honestly, it's hard to even wrap your head around. Just look at this number. Somewhere between 2 and 5% of the entire world's economy every single year. We're talking about trillions of dollars. It's like a massive, hidden financial system running in parallel to the one we all see and use every day. And we have to be super clear about something. This is not a victimless crime, not even close. This laundered cash is the lifeblood for some of the worst things imaginable. We're talking about funding drug cartels, human traffickers, and even terrorist organizations. It's the grease that keeps the wheels of global organized crime turning. So, when you're up against a problem that massive, what can you even do? Well, the good news is there is a huge global fight back underway. Governments around the world are tackling this with a kind of three-part strategy. First, you try to prevent it from happening by setting up strict rules. Then, you work to detect it when it does slip through. And finally, you enforce the laws by going after the criminals. But the key to the whole thing, the real foundation, is cooperation between governments and private institutions, like banks. And it's not just one group fighting this battle. It takes a whole team. You've got the global rulemakers, an organization called the Financial Action Task Force, or FAF. Then you have national agencies called financial intelligence units that act like data detectives. The banks themselves are on the front lines since they're required to spot and report suspicious activity. And of course, you have law enforcement to investigate and make the arrests. But here's the thing about this fight. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. Every time the authorities get better at spotting one trick, the criminals are already inventing a new one. And now, with everything going digital, the game is changing faster than ever. So where is this all headed? Welcome to the new frontier. It's all digital. Criminals are now using cryptocurrencies and things called mixers to make transactions anonymous. They're using NFTs to wash trade, basically selling an asset to themselves over and over to fake a high price. Heck, they're even using online video games, turning dirty money into virtual items, then cashing out clean. The three-step process is the same, but the tools are evolving at lightning speed. So at the end of the day, it's just this relentless, ongoing chase. For every new financial technology that's invented, you can bet someone is already trying to figure out how to exploit it. And right behind them are the investigators working to shut it down. But the fundamental rule of the game never, ever changes. Follow the money.